Well, welcome everybody. We read quickly, no more than 10 minutes. The introductions are very short. You'll be home before the first quarter is over. Though the game will probably be over before the first quarter is over. Well, as you may have read in the Globe, our program was described or ranked in the Atlantic Monthly recently as one of the 10 best programs, and in particular, our alumni and our faculty were among the top 5 in the country. The only category we didn't do so well on, if there are any deans present, is financial support for students. So, but we're enormously proud of our faculty. We've been together on the whole quite a long time, and you'll be able to hear why we were ranked this way tonight. We're going to begin with Rosanna, who's been with us a long time in many capacities. In the English department, she runs the really superb translation program, a wonderful translation seminar course in which the world's greatest translators come one day a week, and then students do their own translations on that other day. It's an indispensable part of our program. She's also, of course, a wonderful poet whose last book of poems was Departure. And here is Rosanna Warren.
Thank you, Leslie, for bringing us all together in this program where we thrive. Simile. As when her friend, the crack Austrian skier, in the story she often told us, had to face his first Olympic ski jump, and from the starting ramp, over the chute that plunged so vertiginously its bottom lip disappeared from view, gazed on a horizon of Alps that swam and dandled around him like toy boats in a bathtub, and he could not, for all his iron determination, training, and courage, ungrip his fingers from the railings of the starting gate, so that his teammates had to join in prying up, finger by finger, his hands to free him. So, facing death, my mother gripped the bed rails, but still stared straight ahead. And who was it, finally, who loosened her hands? In this book, this last book, Departure, I have some short poems I call jackknives because I want them to be short and sharp and just a little dangerous. So here's another jackknife. Moment. When you turn to me, you in bed, still sleep warm against the pillows, I across the room, skirt zipped, stockings on, and you asked so quietly, was that a truthful answer? And outside our narrow third-story window, the Norway maple was poking odd thumbs into the sky, and a skim milk early morning light leaked down the street, down front porch steps, around grimed collars of snowbanks, and the oval Victorian mirror of my dresser reflected all that, with odd angles of roof lines, gutters, chimneys jutting into its peripheral vision. Your question cut, like a knife so sharpened it slices clean, and the surprised flesh doesn't know for a moment how to bleed. And I answered, after a pause, in which the strangeness felt like a form of love, no. And I'll conclude with this poem, which, if it seems incomprehensible to you, is just fine. It's about a form of madness which very few people do understand. Fear. I follow, trying to pick up scraps of the poem as you drop them. You hide them, but they rustle. I pry them out from under cushions, under the bed. I pluck them like beaded curtain strings from the whoosh of water in the shower where you pretend to bathe when you are no one. No one is afraid of water. No one carves the soap so it won't touch his skin. It's the throb and splatter of water that drums the color out of each day. Good day, hello, hollow, spider fingers, sunken eyes, anti-soap for antimatter. You look out from a burned-out star, light years past, still emitting photons with that appealing, deep, affectionate dog's look of frightful understanding, a magic cloak of smell. No one will touch. No one is safe. No one plays golf with interstellar swings, so the ball never lands. TV keeps reciting the right spell day and night. The door is sealed shut with masking tape. Daylight strips human skin like acid. As long as the danger lived outside me, I couldn't write it. Wants to crawl through the keyhole, slide over the windowsill. It breathes in the shirts hanging in the closet. It rots the cheese. It lives in my breath. It hides in the pages of the poems of Paul Verlaine like a smear of shit. It has signed a contract in ink squeezed from stars. You are the gentlest prayer. You see where the shadow falls across each eye. Of course, of curse. Song of all our days. You were empty, so I drew a shrine, and it stayed empty. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from the newest member of our program, who in fact was part of our program some years ago. And we're very glad she's back with us. I mean, I first came across Allegra's work many years ago when I picked up and read this marvelous book, The Family Markowitz, which she astoundingly wrote when you were like 9 years old or something. She was very young when she wrote. Were you undergraduate at Harvard when you wrote that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really quite an astounding book, and I recommend it to all of you. She's back with us. I hope she stays with us longer this time. And her last book, I see it on your lap. You're going to read from it, I think, was Intuition. And so, Allegra Goodman.
Thank you, Leslie. Well, my most recent novel, Intuition, is set across the river in Cambridge, and it's set in a close-knit lab in a private research institute. So there are a bunch of scientists who are researching cancer therapies, and Cliff Banneker, one of the postdocs there, has finally got some results after many years, and everybody in this lab is terrifically excited. Except for one person, one other postdoc in the lab, who happens to also be his former girlfriend, Robin. And in the scene that I'm going to read to you, Robin starts looking for evidence in the lab that Cliff's results are too good to be true. As the last cars were loaded and the coolers drained of melted ice at Walden Pond, Robin was marching down the aisle in Phillips Congregational Church in Watertown on the arm of a groomsman named Tom. At the altar, as rehearsed, she and Tom separated, and Robin took her place in line with the 5 other bridesmaids. Like them, she carried a white nosegay, and like them wore a seafoam green taffeta dress with a tight bodice and full skirt, a sash tied in an oversized bow at the back, and puff sleeves the size of giant melons. She tried to think happy thoughts. She thought about how beautiful the church looked in the late afternoon light with its white walls and dark wood pews. She considered how lovely her auburn-haired cousin looked walking up the white cloth runner. Robin thought how glad she was that her father and her uncle had started speaking to each other once again, and that there was peace in the family, at least for a while. And then inexorably, her mind turned to Cliff. She could not stop questioning his data in her mind. There had been a time she'd searched his face to judge his moods. She'd watched him watch other friends, or even women he hardly knew, and wondered constantly what he felt and thought. Now, however, she was consumed with curiosity about what he'd done. She had her own off-print of the journal article, and she must have read it 20 times. She knew by heart the shape of every column on the page and the placement of each figure. His data in the article looked fine, but the data were more than fine. They were spectacular. Too good to be true? She was horrified at herself, that just a granule of skepticism and resentment could swell like this inside of her. Even now, in church, at her cousin's wedding, her imagination raced ahead. No one was at the lab. Everyone was driving back from Walden Pond. Mendelssohn and Glass would head home, and the researchers would meet for lunch at Elsie's as they always did. The lab was empty, and Cliff's paperwork was there to read. What a strange fever had taken hold of her. At the reception, with the band playing and the family all around her, even then, in every lull, suspicion washed back over her. She stood apart. She was the only scientist in the family, famously erudite and famously single. Her interminable postgraduate studies were a source of bemused pride to her dad, who often wondered aloud when she'd get a real job. Her life in Cambridge was the subject of much talk among her cousins, who had just about given up trying to fix Robin up with friends. Even now, in the white reception tent, the cousins urged her on and pressed her forward in the crush as Carolyn prepared to throw her bouquet. But Robin did not want the flowers and stayed diffidently on the fringes of the crowd. Carolyn turned her back on the girls and threw her bouquet over her head, and the bridesmaids screamed, and the flower girls shrieked and jumped up the way Robin had seen dogs on the common jump up to catch tennis balls in their mouths. One of the little girls caught the beribboned prize, and the bridesmaids turned away, smiling, but slightly disappointed toward their boyfriends. "I didn't see you trying very hard over there," her father teased. "Sorry, Dad," she told him. "I guess I'll just have to be an old maid." "Don't say that." He dabbed his perspiring face with his handkerchief. He was flushed and overweight, hot in his suit. She worried about her father and pestered him about going on a diet and quitting smoking and getting a stress test. But he never listened to her when she went on about these matters. Maddeningly, he always said, "You can start giving me medical advice when you get a medical degree." And then Robin's stepmother, Lynn, would jump to his defense. "I like your style," Robin had told Lynn once. "I like the way you stand up for Dad and defend his right to die." Robin despaired for her father, but she loved him. She had no patience for her stepmother. When the toasts were said and the dancing done, Tom drove Robin back to Cambridge. "Just tell me where," he said, and she guided him through Harvard Square, up Broadway, to Felton Street. "This is it?" he asked uncertainly as he gazed at the Philpott Institute. "Thanks, this is perfect," she told him and hurried out. "I just have to check some stuff at the lab." "Nice outfit," the guard told Robin as she sprinted past in her bouffant dress. She flushed but didn't stop. She pushed open the heavy doors that led to the back passageway and ran up the stairs to the second floor with its peculiar smell of ammonia and pencil shavings, its linoleum tiles checked black and green like the mottled covers of composition books. Up again on the black iron stairs, her heels clanged on the metal treads, and her nosegay of white roses flopped and drooped. She threw it down on the table in the lounge. Darting inside the lab, she flicked on the fluorescent under-cabinet lights and found her copy of the journal article on her desk. Then she reached for Cliff's lab book and riffled through its alternating white and yellow pages, devouring the numbers there. She looked at most of this before. Her heart was galloping, her lungs cramped and strained at the tight bodice of her dress. "There is nothing here," she told herself. Still, she checked the numbers in each table. Meticulous as a scientific bookkeeper, she combed through the raw data and final draft. Line by line, she audited Cliff's accounts. She took a deep breath and closed the book. There were no discrepancies. She ran downstairs and unlocked every door. Her dress billowed about her knees, the synthetic fabric rustling around her like a shower curtain. She stopped at the lockers in the animal facility and donned lab coat and hairnet. She peeled disposable booties from the stack and slipped one over each pump. She was not afraid of the eerie light or squirming animals. The faint smell, the kitchen refrigerator that served as morgue, all the more gruesome for its ordinary white and chrome, its butter compartment and crisper drawers, and even the snack drawer meant for cheeses stuffed with stiff mouse bodies in their body bags. She was not afraid of the scuffling mice, the wounded animals, staining each other as they fought. She feared none of this. She was afraid of herself for rushing down so desperately. In search of what? Evidence Cliff was not as lucky or as talented as everybody thought. In the animal room, she turned on the examining light and took down the clipboards that hung from the cage racks. She pored over the registry of births and deaths and procedures in between. She peered at the nude mice in their cages. Generations had come and gone since March, and any surviving animals from then were old and blind. She'd go home. She would forget all this. Still, she slipped into one last room. The dissection room was unusually neat, the table clear except for its polystyrene dissecting pad. The drawers underneath were locked, but Robin knew where the key was kept and opened them one by one. Trays of rusty pins emerged, boxes of extra gloves in black plastic bags, and there in the bottom drawer, a messy pile of papers, mostly scratch, along with a couple of thin-line permanent markers. Robin's fingers trembled as she held up the pages to the examining light. There was Cliff's handwriting, sloping, spiky, unmistakable on 3 pages ripped from a spiral notebook. She could not tell if these were just draft notes for his experiments in the journal article or for some other set. Then on the second page, she saw a notation for injection with R7 and the date March 21st. She began to run down the hall, her heels sliding in the slippery booties. She pulled them off, tossed her hairnet. She dumped her lab coat in an open laundry bin. Then she pulled her shoes off altogether and began racing up the stairs in her stocking feet, carrying keys, journal article, 3 pages of data, and her dyed satin shoes. She sprinted for the first floor photocopier. Thank you.
So from our colleague who's been with us the shortest amount of time to Derek Walcott, who's been with us, I guess for kind of surprisingly me, the longest time. It's been an enormous privilege, not just for Derek's students, but for his colleagues as well, to have this wonderful voice among us. The great poet, Derek Walcott.
Everybody here is great. This is set in Spain. Plod of a hoof in blood-crusted earth, clatter of a rivulet over bleached stones, black bulls trampling the shade of cork trees, wind in the high wheat whispering like surf in Sicily or the opening pages of Cervantes. 2 stalks on the bell tower in Alcala, the boring suffering of love that tires. Though you change names and countries, España, Italia, smell your hands, they reek of imagined crimes. The cypresses suffer in silence, but the oaks sometimes rustle their foliate lyres. A train crosses the scorched plain in one sentence. In the cork groves, shadows rhyme with their sources. No name except Andalusia would make sense from the train window of horses and galloping horses, echoes and arches of Spain. The word Campania you smuggled from Italy and its fields of sunflowers. Is there a tilde here for Anna or Anya? Irises stipple the hot square in passing showers. Shadows pause in the sun's capework. Ornate balconies rust. The sunlight of olive oil slowly spreads in saucers, and loaves that are hard to break have a sacred crust. Esperanza, cherished Esperanza. Your lashes like black moths, like twigs your frail wrists, your small, cynical mouth with its turned-down answers. When it laughs, it is like a soft stanza in a ballad by Lorca. Your teeth are white stones in a riverbed. I hear the snorting stallions of Cordoba in heat. I hear my bones castanet and a rattle of heels like machine guns. Suppose I lived in this town, there would be a fountain, the tower with 2 stalks, I call them cranes, and black-haired beauties passing. Then again, I wouldn't be living in a posh hotel. All of Spain's heart is in this square, its side streets shut and halved by the August sun. The bull ring would be closed until Sundays. Heat would scorch the park benches, and then there would be a lot of pigeons hopping on the cobbles with their pink feet. I would sit there alone, an old poet with white thoughts, and you, my pewter, would be dead, and only half your name would be remembered, because by then you would have lost power over my sleep, until all that remains is the fountain's jet, stalks on the bell tower, or cranes. I was in St. Thomas or St. Croix with Joseph Brodsky, sitting in a house by a pool, and Joseph looked up and there was this huge white bird in the trees, and he got scared for a second. We were by the pool of a friend's house in St. Croix, and Joseph and I were talking. He stopped the talk. On this visit, I had hoped he would enjoy, to point out with a gasp, not still or stalking, but fixed in the great fruit trees, a sight that shook him. Like something out of Bosch, he said. The huge bird was suddenly there, perhaps the same one that took him, a sepulchral egret or heron. The unutterable word was always with us like Eumaeus, a third companion. And what got him, who loved snow, what brought it on was that the bird was such a deathly white. Now when at noon or evening on the lawn the egrets soar together in noiseless flight or tack like a regatta, the sea-green grass, they are seraphic souls, as Joseph was. Thank you.
I guess I'm going to go, and I promised my 2 classes, my undergraduate and graduate class, that I would make this a little lesson for them. Yes, I'm going to do the cat thing. This comes out of my saying in the tip sheet that I hand out that one should only know what percentage of your endings? How much? 65 to 70% of your endings. That's roughly right. I mean, the idea is if you know completely the ending of the work you're about to write, you're in a straitjacket. No room for surprise, no room for discovery. So you want to have, but if you don't have more than 60%, say, you'll meander and you'll in danger of getting lost. And the reason I bring this up is that I've just now started the 3rd of my Lieb Goldkorn books, someone I've written about for many years. And it begins with him, I knew it would begin with him, putting his head into an oven because he's 103 or 104 and well-baked, I guess. What else do you do? Besides, he's completely alone. His building has been gutted. All around him, workers, steel workers, are raising on the Upper West Side of Manhattan this enormous, fancy Casa Blanca, a fancy apartment co-op building. He's the only one left, rent stabilized, behind. And there's nothing much else for him to do. I think all you have to know ahead of time is that his family was shipped off to Dachau, and from there may have gone to Auschwitz. His landlord is named Frank Fingerhut Jr., and Frank Fingerhut has done this to him. And there's a name Pergam, that was his old professor in Vienna when he was growing up. So here is Lieb at the end, it seems. He looks at the stove. Hail, magic chef. I see thy grinning mouth, thine broad white brow. Soon, dear friend, soon. No more waiting for long-winded Lieb. Open jaws, open wide. Wilt thou not do for me what Brutus did for Caesar? The hiss of your breath. We who are about to die salute you. What wouldst thou speak, venerable Roman range? Frank fingerhood, fies, fiend, foe, falscher Freunde. What? I understand. Why not kill that fraud, the fickle fellow, instead of yours truly, the flautist? That requires a moment's thought. So this delaying thought has come to him. He thinks it over, but returns to his original task. Step 1, close all the windows. Check. But the din of fabrication still resounds. How many floors of this Everest now rise above me? 15, 16, perhaps already 17, all clad in milk-white marble, ergo Casablanca. Step 2, turn on spigots for gas, also the knob for roasting. Music, key of F to my ears. Step 3, a note, not necessary. What you read now is my farewell. Auf Wiedersehen. Step 4, open the magic chef maw. Check. Darkness, a cave, like that of Professor Pergam's Plato. I drop like a devotee to my knees, for in that cavern of shadow and shade one finds the other world, where the ancient Greeks maintained all is true, all is good, all is beautiful. A number 1, sterling silver. Lay down, Lieb Goldkorn, your weary head. A fitting end. For did not your own family, sisters, Mutter, putative pair, expire from the inhalation of a similar vapor? And your larger family, the Jewish people, were they not killed in just such a kiln? Who am I, a simple panpiper, to avoid a matching fate? Bad, bad man, you should be whipped. Now I understand. All my life, my dears, has been a journey to join you. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Eshad. Ouch. Step 5. I should have brought knee pads. No matter. I begin to feel a dropsy, a welcome slumber. Could I really kill Frank Fingerhood instead? Perhaps with a knife? No, away with such thoughts. Feasts, I forgive you. It comes. Yes, it comes. The world beyond darkness. O Pergam, O Plato, you spoke true. There, deep in the cave of shadows, a single blue light, steady, unblinking, the ray of a distant star. What peace, what joy, for in this beam are gathered all the human souls, Miss Litwack, Madame Miranda, the heavenly Henya, who wish to welcome me to their celestial abode. Mamala, your teats, I come, ja, I come. But Terry, this flame, is it not the pilot light of the magic chef oven? Pilot light? But will it not, upon encountering the gas company product, create a detonation? Help! Feuer! Wait, be calm. Did not the Keystone Corporation shut off this natural gas? For flat 5D and all 130 West? Then what is this sibilation, the fizzle and fizz? Look, adjoining the blue light, I see a red one, also unblinking, a ruby, ruddy, rubicund. Save me, Jesus. It is the eye of the devil. Fut! Ouch! Ouch! The claws of the devil, too. Ah, it is the end of Lieb Goldkorn. Watch out! Satan, the hellhound! Fut! Hellhound? Hellcat. With a single bound, fut! This feline has leaped onto my head, then onto the green-colored linoleum, and now, with a final bound, hurls herself onto the sill of my window. 100 questions bloom. How did this animal enter the magic chef? And how long did it make this appliance its home? Do I have, in Unit 5D, a mouse? So he ruminates about all this, and he hears the steel workers. Of course, he thinks that all steel workers are Mohawk Indians. Remember how they used to walk high up over the ground. And he comes back to his final thoughts. And this tabby, licking with indifference his or her paws, into my hairless head springs the memory of Professor Pergam's lectures on the ancient Egyptians. Was not to this hoary folk the cat sacred, worshipped as the goddess Bast, symbol of motherhood, symbol of fertility? That is why they were preserved after death, so they might accompany their masters on the boat of Ra to afterlife. Meow. Dost call, my mummy? Come, we shall sail through the air together. Let us use the language of the welders and bolters about us to the happy hunting ground. Step 1A, open window. Check. 2A, take into my arms the piebald puss. What a creature, a red eye, a blue one, tail ringed in black like that of a raccoon, whiskers on one side only. What's this? A missing leg? A half-chewed ear? You too have been caught up on the wheel of sorrow, darling. The struggle for existence. Here, pussy puss, come, kitty. Our hearts, yours and mine, shall be weighed against the feather of truth. So, clinging with claws, my companion attaches herself, for I see no organ of regeneration, no sign of spermery, to my lumberman's coat. Oh, with a rough tongue, she laps my chin. Such a sweetheart. It is a blessing from God not to die alone. Steps 3, 4, 5, lift with difficulty, and at age 103, first one leg, then the other over the sill, then duck one's head under the glass. Voila. No, do not tremble, Jaime honey. Have you not 8 additional lives? Example of Jewish humor. Laughing upon the gallows. Now a last peek at the teeming scene below, the hard hatters, their diesel trucks, their pneumatic drills. Look, my mouser, my Munchkin, that is a mixer for cement. In turning, it makes the liquid mortar. Interessant. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? More Hebrew humor. Do you see how the cranes lift the squares of marble into the air? How white they are, like alabaster, like milk. Meow. Ah, milks. Art hungry? Thirsty too? I have in the Frigidaire no edibles. Fear not. In the field of reeds there will be milk, honey, Lindt brand chocolates. All, mein Liebling, all. Shall we make the jump? Let us count together. Eins. Yes, yes. Well done. Zwei. That means 2, my tabby. Und drei. So, in honor of the Mohawk chieftain, let us cry together, Geronimo. Thank you. So that cat squeezed in with the 32% that you leave open. And now we're going to hear from the poet David Ferry. David is a wonderful translator. I believe his last book of translations was the Epistles of Horace. His last book of poems was Of No Country I Know. David is, I suppose, not a formal member of our program, but he's with us practically every semester. He's become a wonderful colleague and a pal of the department. David Ferry.
I'm going to read two passages from the end of the near the end of the second book of Virgil's Aeneid. The second book of the Aeneid is the story of the fall of Troy and is being told by Aeneas at a dinner party in Carthage. And if you wish to hear what was the fate of Priam, I must tell you. When he sees how the city has fallen and how the doors of his palace are smashed and broken into, and how the Greeks are in the innermost chambers of his home, the aged king takes up the royal armor so long unused by him and puts it on his trembling old man's shoulders and girds himself with his useless sword and sends himself to death, helpless old man, against the crowding foe. In the atrium, in the middle of his palace, that was open to the vault of the heavens above, there was a great altar, and leaning over it, an ancient laurel tree that with its shade embraced protectively the household gods. Here's Hecuba, his wife, and with her are her daughters, huddled together like doves, sheltering in vain from the black winds of the storm that drove them there, and clutching in their hands the sacred icons. But when she sees her husband, Priam, wearing the armor he had worn when he was young, Hecuba cries out to him, "My husband, my poor husband, what are you thinking of, that you have put on this armor and carried these weapons? Even if Hector were here, this is no longer a time for such as these. Come here with me. Take shelter at the altar. It will protect us. If not, this is the place where we will all of us together, die together." These were her words as she drew him close to her and helped him to a seat before the shrine. But suddenly there's one of Priam's sons, Polites, fleeing through a hail of arrows from Pyrrhus's slaughter and running through the halls and empty courtyards of the palace to the atrium where Priam was, and Pyrrhus hot on his heels and hot to butcher him and going to do so now. And Polites falls and his life pours out of him in streams of blood before the eyes of his father and his mother. And though already in the hands of death, Priam cries out in rage in his old man voice, "If anywhere there's righteousness in heaven, may the deities pay you back for what you do, your obscene crime, polluting a father's face with what it has to see, his own son's slaughter. Achilles, whose son you pretend to be, did not behave like this. He paid the due respect to a father's supplication and sent back home the body of Hector to its tomb and sent me home unharmed." And saying this, he weakly hurls his spear at Pyrrhus, and the spear rebounds from the ringing brass of Pyrrhus's shield and bobbing purposeless hangs from the top of the boss. And Pyrrhus says, "Then go down there below and take this news about me to my father, and be sure to tell him all about his son, degenerate Pyrrhus, and his despicable deeds." And having said these words, he drags old Priam, trembling and shaking and slipping in the blood that was pouring out of the body of his son, to the high altar. And there he clutches him by the hair with his left hand, and with his right hand raises his glittering sword and plunges it in, up to the hilt, into his side. This is the way the fortunes of Priam came to the end that was fated for him. fated to see the fires consuming his Troy and Pergamum fall down. He who had been the monarch of Asia, the ruler of so many lands and of so many tribes, a huge, headless body upon the shore, a nameless trunk. And as Anchises, Aeneas' father, has agreed to leave Troy, and this is the account in this next episode. I take up the tawny pelt of a lion and cover my neck and my broad shoulders with it, and bowing down, I accept the weight of my father. Iulus, his little boy, Aeneas' little boy, Iulus puts his hand in mine and goes along beside me, trying to match my steps as best he can, trying his best to keep up. My wife follows behind us a little way back, so we all set out together, making our way among the shadows. And I, who only just a little while ago had faced undaunted showers of arrows and swarms of enemy Greeks, am frightened by every slightest change in the air and startled by every slightest sound I hear, fearful for whom I walk with and whom I carry. And just as I had almost come to the gates and thought that I'd almost gotten us free, I thought I heard the sound of many feet, and my father, peering intently into the shadows, cries out to me, get away, my son, they are coming. I see their shining shields. I see the glow of their weapons in the dark. I am alarmed, and I don't know what happened, but some power hostile to me distracts my wits, and I am confused, and I lead us away by ways that I don't know, and off the familiar streets that together we are following. And so, oh God, some fate has taken away my wife, Creusa, my wife, away from me. What happened? Did she wander from the way that we were going? Did she fall back, having to rest someplace back there, and so we left her? I did not know. I never saw her again. And as we went, I never had turned to look behind, and never thought of her until we reached the mound and Ceres' ancient palace. When all of us at last had gotten there, we all were there, but she had vanished, and she wasn't there, gone from her people, gone from her child and her husband. And this is one short poem of my own called To Wear. That's W-H-E-R-E, To Wear. Wearing a tawny lion pelt upon my spindly shoulders, I carry both of them, my father and my mother, into the darkness. My father hoarsely singing, they are there, the glimmer of something that is glimmering there. I see the glow of weapons in the shadows, through which, with my purblind eyes, I think I see something in the darkness waiting there. Above me, in the dark, my mother's voice calls down to me, who's there? Who is it there? Step after step together, we make our way in the darkness of my memory of our house. Thank you.
Yeah, we talk a lot about translation in our workshops, and lately we've been discussing these new Russian, the Tolstoy translations and things. But David, that sounds to me like every word is perfect. So. We make it our practice at these yearly gatherings to have one of our graduates speak. 1 year a fiction writer and 1 year a poet. This year it's a poet, and to introduce him, another poet, Robert Pinsky.
Tom Yuill is a Texan. He came to BU some years ago from Texas, and he has, for now, settled here in the Boston area. He has taught since leaving BU, at BU, also at Harvard, at the Massachusetts College of Art, Emerson College, and the New England Institute of Art. His collection of poems, Medicine Show, is under consideration. I have a very strong feeling that it's going to be published probably pretty soon. He tells me that he is going to be interviewed by the end of this week by MTV. He says he has no idea why. Tom Yuill.
You figure if Robert can jump up there, you can, and of course you realize that you're wrong. I'll read, first of all, I want to thank Robert for the invitation. It's a very, very big honor to read with Robert and Derek and Rosanna and David. I was telling Leslie before, it was enough of an honor for me to get to brag to friends of mine that I worked with them in graduate school. To get to read with them is really something. I'll read briefly. I'll read a poem called Dallas Skinheads. The poem contains 4 lines from a song called Streets of Laredo, my favorite version of which is recorded by Johnny Cash on his last album, The Man Comes Around. And I should point out that the Dallas Skinheads, the kids that I knew, I didn't know that many skinheads, but they didn't know the roots of it. They didn't know that the skinheads had been in England in the 60s and that they had come back in the 70s as guys who wanted to shave their heads to perform better in fights at soccer games where your hair could be grabbed. They didn't, and of course they didn't know anything about the politics or the neo-Nazi nonsense. I don't even mention that garbage. These were just kids who were trying to come up with some personal presentation or style and failing. Dallas Skinheads. Heads shaved to give advantage during fistfights at soccer games in Manchester or Berlin became shaved heads in Addison or Farmer's Branch, decorticated smooth to piss on both thou shalt and thou shalt not. Oh, skinheads of the early 80s, yes, you had a weird joie de vivre. Stomping and swinging with torpid disinterest, bloodshot eyes crossing from indifferent headbutting of windshields and indifferent gobbling of acid and ecstasy. Not even drunken, wobbling love, just wanting whatever the next sting was. Oh, raspberries blown at ennui in the form of noses burst to bloom by redneck fists. Were you mostly piss? Ah, Dionysus in the 80s, hairspray paisleyed on bangs, storms at dinner tables in St. Louis, in Ann Arbor, long-sleeve paisley shirts covering tracks in Plano, no to the bond salesman father, yes to smack after dinner. The death rattle should be adored, she would think if she had the words. Another voice recorded in London, in New York, gives her her words. Dreams yielding, death seekers voting for Reagan again. Her own words not shelved, just not there. Grandmother dies suddenly, and dying floats in beneath mom's shoulder blades. Then she starts to smoke again in secret. No charades from Dionysus last. In the 80s, people heard no crying. Get 6 jolly cowboys to carry my coffin. Get 6 dance hall maidens to bear up my palm. Throw bunches of roses all over my coffin, roses to deaden the clods as they fall. Heads without hair in the cancer ward, under knit caps, under silk scarves, under the wig she wore as she said, "I love you too," and struggling not to cry, walked in quick, polite, deliberate steps towards the hospital door. And he saw this, then got in the car to go on to the concert. Were those arguments during your teenage years a good idea or not? Were those ulcers your idea? The Dallas skinhead traded an escort radar detector he stole in broad daylight for 7 hits of acid, which he dropped on the spot. "You're getting a great deal," he said, "but I'll do anything for drugs." His mom said, "It's always something with you, John," to her husband of 45 years, and he, expertly tuning his car, heard nothing. Oh, mimesis flew for thistly mote, pearly cell or migrating idea. Was he infected, a hell in which no thoughts were his? What sign of Christ within his poor scalped hand as he gazes at the light which shivers in the hallowed vacant lot? I'll read one of a translation / imitation, depending upon how faithful you are to John Dryden. Rosanna's translation workshop's been mentioned a couple of times. And it, of course, became very important to me. So this is Francois Villon for Orléans. Francois Villon had a tendency to be welcomed into environments and then asked to leave. Hope that's not an omen. For Orléans. Here beside the fountain I die of thirst. In my own state, I'm in a foreign land. I'm comforted and grin when in despair, when vested like a judge bears a worst. I talk about my pleasures, but they're bland. I'm always welcomed, always shown the door. At daybreak, I tell all good night, good luck. All my learnings earned by pure blind chance. While lying down, I know I'll fall, I'm sure. I'm so well set, but haven't one sawbuck. Am not an heir, expect inheritance. Am always welcomed, always shown the door. I toil, but still don't give a happy damn. I'll spend my coins before I stop to think. I know it all, and my mind is a blur. Lies, the truth, to me they're both the same. It's soothing knowing the sturdiest boat sinks. I'm always welcomed, always shown the door. Forbearing princes learn. I know the score. I'm quite unique, like everyone you've known. What's my gift? Retrieving things I pawn. Being always welcomed, always shown the door. I'll read a fragment of one and then one final poem. This is from a poem containing several different voices, and I had, Keats has the great fragment, This Living Hand, which is so beautiful that one hates to second guess John Keats, but I'm almost glad we don't know the rest of the poem. And thinking of that, I had a bunch of things that I couldn't quite make fit, and then I sort of stuck them together and then talked to David Ferry, and then didn't pay attention to some very good advice, and then stuck it together again, and I think it's a poem now. This second part is in the voice of Telemachus to Athena. He doesn't know he's talking to her. It's not a translation, but it's that scene. Stranger, at this point, I just try not to fear the bewildering night or the slothful afternoons, hollow in the hollow light. The shade in my mind is thick as a stone wall. The shade in my mind is thick with medicinal smell. Yesterday, I thought my venerable father was standing nearby. I hold him in my heart the way the lion's head holds the iron ring on the door of the venerable building. He said he is always with me, and I believed him, but today, still, Nothing is the same, and today, still, it seems my fault. And the last poem I'll read is called Father to Son, and it contains things that I received from my dear old dad, and woven throughout are little snippets from Dad's favorite psalm. One thing I should tell you, his dad was a trial lawyer. Now, it's wrong to say he didn't respect doctors. He did respect doctors. My cousin's a doctor. We were very fond of my cousin, but he didn't listen to doctors. You can't get him to listen to a doctor. So, and in fact, when the doctors were trying to diagnose him with something called chain stoats, or decide what his illness was, he actually started to mess with him. And it happens that he was born in Peking, China, so there's a moment in the poem where he feels like he's being cross-examined, and he decides to take the occasion to outwit the doctors. And then father to son. Oh, and by the way, the thing that he says here, he actually did say. I had to wake up early for swim practice, and he would come in early and say this. You're about to hear. Like Odysseus to his son, I'd like to pray and have it reach him. And I'd like to hit the light switch in his room 8 minutes early, cover my laughter at his groans and say, wake up and piss, the world's on fire. The Lord of hosts is with us. Tom, this vision is a ticklish thing, a feather near some snoring giant's nose. Be careful with it. All war is a web of men, not just a flash of your temper. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in the fire. Dad was born in Peking, China, where Cupid, this is my grandfather, Cupid was stationed. He and grandmother Ewell lived there for years. Mr. Ewell, you know where you are? Yes. Long pause during which the doctors fidget. Will you tell us, please, sir? Baylor Hospital, Dallas, Texas. He might have had sleep apnea. He might have had Cheyne-Stokes respiration. To check, the doctors asked him questions, checked his mind. Sir, have you ever been in the hospital before? The last time I was in the hospital was in Peking, China in 1931, and I only went that time to see my parents. Funny thing about that, I said at his funeral, giving his eulogy, is that the doctors didn't get it. From the back, filled with lawyers he practiced with, loud guffaws, men slapping their knees. I shall be exalted among the heathen. I shall be exalted in the earth. The heathens were not those who didn't go to church. They were those who made and kept the money, those for whom the world was there to be conquered. Dad thought the world was there to be saved. Tom, when Jacob wrestles an angel, or Tomlinson fights a Comanche, each is struggling with himself. War is quicksand for the guy who thinks he's a cat, is soldiering for he who thinks he's a poet, dreaming he's a soldier. Vision is ticklish, Tom. It leads you into caves where you wake giants who don't care about your vision. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God. You're a good boy, Tom, he said once as I tidied up his hospital room. I shall be exalted among the heathen. I shall be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Thank you.
Well, I think most of you know Hajin's story, how he was trapped here after Tiananmen Square, how he's made a life for himself here. If you don't know it, you can read his latest book, A Free Life, which is both about and not about Hajin and his story. I've recently finished it myself. It's not like reading a novel. It's like having a friend in the house for all the time that it takes to read it. It's a story of a life that's constantly, slowly diminished by the battering of the mundane. But underneath that, there is a slow gathering of strength, of something I think one could call spirituality, which spills out in the end in poetry. Here's this remarkable writer and my friend Ha-Jin.
I'm going to read a short chapter since I only have 10 minutes, and this is the relatively self-contained. I think okay. This is the first chapter of part 4 of the novel, A Free Life. This the family, Wu family, they moved to Georgia and they bought a restaurant, small restaurant, and started a different life there. And this chapter starts at the time they had been there for a year. Spring in Georgia was miserable for Nan and Ping, both allergic to pollen. The air turned yellowish in daylight, and even the surfaces of roads changed color in the mornings, dusted with the powder from trees. Every day before going to work, Ping would sweep their deck clean of yellow dust. Once she couldn't find their car in the parking lot of Winn-Dixie, pollen having coated all the vehicles parked there and dulled their colors. Here, the pollen season was much longer than in New England, usually from February to mid-May. Whenever Ping went out, she wore a mask, a nose piece, regardless of the attention it drew, whereas Nan wouldn't do that, so his nose had swollen to twice its normal size. How eagerly they looked forward to the next rain, which might cleanse the air for a few days so that they could walk outside again. To fight the allergies, Ping made Taotao and Nan take tablets of bee pollen every day, which helped them, though Nan would have gastric pain if he swallowed them on an empty stomach. The Woods also took plenty of vitamins to build up their resistance to the allergies. Not until mid-May, when a drought set in, did they begin to feel better. Miraculously, Taotao's allergy had subsided considerably this year. Back in Massachusetts, pollen had tortured him, but now he could play in the open air without a running nose or itchy eyes. Nan joked about him, saying the boy had acculturated so well he would become a redneck eventually. I ain't a redneck, his son protested, imitating some of his classmates with an upswing lilt on the last syllable neck. Don't use that kind of language, his mother warned him. Yes, ma'am. They all laughed. Actually, like Taotao, Nan and Ping had begun to adapt to life here as well. Sometimes Ping made grits for breakfast, and they often ate kale and collard and mustard greens. Nan and Taotao also liked pork rice, boiled peanuts, fried okra, hush puppies, barbecue sauce. But the boy disliked the cheese here, which indeed had a dull taste compared with that in the Northeast. Cornbread had become a favorite of theirs, like a kind of pastry, and they'd buy it whenever it was on sale. Back in China, Ping and Nan had lived on corn buns for many years, but that was a different kind, with no sugar or milk mixed into the cornmeal. It was pure corn, 100%. One day, Ping cooked a few corn buns, the Chinese type, for Toto, who had asked her for several times. But the boy, after taking a bite, wouldn't touch it again. Tastes like crap, he said. Unlike him, his parents each ate a whole bun with relish. They also brought one to Tammy. At the sight of it, the waitress got excited. But after having a morsel, she frowned and said, "You mainlanders always insist on the reunification with Taiwan, but I bet no Taiwanese wants to eat this stuff. You should eliminate this sort of compounds before you talk about the reunification. This is absolutely not for human consumption." Despite saying that, and despite eating only a quarter of the bun with a piece of smoked herring, as Ping suggested, Tammy was pleased by the Wu's sharing it with her. She wrapped the remainder of the bun and took it home to show her roommates. Since I don't have time for another chapter, I'm going to read a short poem. In fact, I added 25 poems into this novel, and the poems were written by the protagonist, who is a struggling poet. So the poems here function as an epilogue. And this one's called My Doves. And the protagonist now who used to be a very lazy man. Back in China, he never lifted his finger to help his wife. And so the wives in the neighborhood always complained, saying at least Ping should make him wash his underwears. But in America, he has changed profoundly. He has become a relatively a handyman, but he still misses his former life to a degree. My doves, all night long, I hear my doves cooing to tell me there is a snowstorm gathering. Their feathers, once intensely white, are gray and tattered, though the whistle I tied to them 11 years ago still scattered notes of brass when they fly. They tremble a little from cold. Their short bills, having lost the jade-like translucency, are more fragile than before. Who feeds them now? On whose eaves is their coat? Do they still go to the aspen grove to look for worms? Do the cats still attack them and steal their young? Time and again, they seem to cry, "Nan, Nan, come and take us away." They make my morning blue, bluer than at freezing dusk. All day long, I see the shadows of their wings flitting about through my lawn, along the asphalt, across the walls of the dining hall, on the kitchen floor, around my walk. Thank you.
Well, speaking of pals, we'll end with my friend Robert Pinsky. He, not only my friend, but a great friend to poetry in America, a great friend of our program. I would say every good thing that our creative writing program has done, Robert has been intimately involved with. His latest book of poems, which I'm reading now, is called Gulf Music. Robert Pinsky.
Thank you all. Thank you, Leslie. To be here with such colleagues is not only an honor, it's an inspiration. It reminds me how fortunate we are to have this profession and to be practicing it together with such students. I'm going to read 3 poems to you from Gulf music, and I've tried to make them thematic. One of the things that the book tries to think about a lot is forgetting. And these poems, in different ways, are about forgetting. I've tried to choose ones that are less political and social than a lot of the material in the book. The next to last poem in the book is a kind of love poem, sort of as myself, sort of thinking about my parents, and in a way it's Adam and Eve. The poem is called Antique. Antique. I drowned in the fire of having you. I burned in the river of not having you. We lived together for hours in a house of 1,000 rooms, and we were parted for 1,000 years. 10 minutes ago, we raised our children who cover the earth and have forgotten that we existed. It was not Maya. It was not a ladder to perfection. It was this cold sunlight falling on this warm earth. When I turned, you went to hell. When your ship fled the battle, I followed you and lost the world, without regret, but with stormy recriminations. Someday, far down that corridor of horror, the future, someone who buys this picture of you for the frame at a stall in a dwindled city will study your face and decide to harbor it for a little while longer from the waters of anonymity, the acids of breath. There's a poem in the book called Forgetting. I will read it. I was very pleased. It's early in the book. I was very pleased when Leslie said he liked it. I think that inspired the reading, my choice of the poems to read. The forgetting. The forgetting I notice most as I get older is really a form of memory. The undergrowth of things unknown to you young that I have forgotten. Memory of so much crap, jumbled with so much that seems to matter. Lieutenant Callie, Captain Easy, Mei-Ling Sung, Sibi Sisti, and all the forgettings that preceded my own. Baghdad, Egypt, Greece, the plains, centuries of lootings of antiquities, obscure atrocities. Imagine a big tent filled with mostly kids yelling for poetry. In fact, it happened. I was there in New Jersey at the famous poetry show. I used to wonder, what if the Baseball Hall of Fame overflowed with too many thousands of greats, all in time unremembered? Hardly anybody can name all 8 of their great-grandparents. Can you? Will your children's grandchildren remember your name? You'll see, you little young jerks, your favorite music and your political furors, too, will need to get sorted in dusty electronic corridors. In 1972, Zhou Enlai was asked the lasting effects of the French Revolution. Too soon to tell. Remember, or was it Mao Zedong? Poetry made out of air strains to reach back to begats and suspiring forward into air, grunting to beget the hungry or overfed future. Ezra Pound praises the emperor who appointed a committee of scholars to pick the best 450 no plays and destroy all the rest, the fascist. The stand-up master Stephen Wright says he thinks he suffers from both amnesia and déjà vu. I feel like I have forgotten this before. Who remembers the arguments when Jurors gave Pound the only prize for poetry awarded by the United States government. Until then. I was in the big tent when the guy read his poem about how the Jews were warned to get out of the Twin Towers before the planes hit. The crowd was applauding and screaming. They were happy. It isn't that they were anti-Semitic or anything. They just weren't listening. Or, no, they were listening, but that certain way. In it comes, you hear it, and that self-same second, you swallow it or expel it. An ecstasy of forgetting. I close the book, and I will close the reading with a passage from the final canto of Dante's Paradiso. He alludes to a legend that he gets, I guess, from Virgil of the Sibyl. And the Sibyl was a writer like us. The Sibyl was loathed by everybody who went to her temple because she wrote on leaves everything that would happen. She had perfect knowledge of the fate of the entire world. And she wrote what she knew on these leaves. And Virgil says people loathed her in her temple because when you went to her temple, as soon as the door started to turn on its hinges, it let in a breeze that sent the leaves up into the air in total confusion, so they couldn't be read. And as I understand the passage, Dante in the passage accepts forgetting. He knows that the process of being remembered or remembering means forgetting many things, that it is a selective process. And he sort of embraces what he's going to lose as he goes to something higher. And I think that's something every artist, every person who tries to remember or write also knows. I say that because I'm hoping this is an appropriate poem to end the reading with. So this is my version of Paradiso 33. It's entitled From the Last Canto of Paradise. As I drew nearer to the end of all desire, I brought my longing's ardor to a final height, just as I ought. My vision, becoming pure, entered more and more the beam of that high light that shines on its own truth. From then, my seeing became too large for speech, which fails at a sight beyond all boundaries, at memory's undoing. As when the dreamer sees, and after the dream, the passion endures, imprinted on his being, though he can't recall the rest. I am the same. Inside my heart, although my vision is almost entirely faded, droplets of its sweetness come the way the sun dissolves the snow's crust, the way, in the wind that stirred the light leaves, the oracle that the Sibyl wrote was lost.
I've just received word, Ravens 3, Patriots 210, but they're not going to pile it on. Thank you so much for coming. Hope to see you next year.